I'm really excited to introduce our lunch plenary speaker, Diane Yentel. She's the president and CEO of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, which is a membership organization dedicated solely to achieving socially just public policy that ensures people with the lowest incomes in the United States have affordable and decent homes. She's also a veteran affordable housing policy expert and advocate with nearly 2 decades of work on affordable housing and community development issues. Tomorrow we are going to have a listening session and discussion and an opportunity for you to ask any questions to Diane. It's at 10 a.m. in the morning. So please listen, and if she's mentioning something that you want to learn more about, write that question down and you'll get an opportunity to ask it tomorrow. It's kind of difficult to do a Q&A in this environment, so we'll ask that you leave those questions for tomorrow. But it's such an honor for us to have her at our conference, so everybody give a warm welcome for Diane Yentel.
Thanks, Brian. Good afternoon. So it's such a pleasure to be here today. I've never been to Alaska. It's my first time, so I'm thrilled to be here. And it's so inspiring to be in a room filled with so many people working incredibly hard on such important issues to save lives, to end homelessness, and to end housing poverty. So I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to be here, to be inspired by you and the work that you're doing, and to learn from you and listen about how the affordable housing crisis is impacting people here in Alaska. And as Brian said, at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, our mission is to achieve socially just public policy that ensures that the lowest income people have decent, safe, and affordable homes. And to the extent that we are successful at all in our work, it's because of our members throughout the country and our partners, especially our state partners, like the Alaska Coalition on Homelessness, on Housing and Homelessness. And we're so grateful for their partnership and for Brian's leadership. We've been able to partner on a lot of things over the years, and I know that he's doing a tireless job here, working to advance affordable housing solutions at the local, state, and federal levels. So thanks for the opportunity, Brian. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks for the partnership and for the chance to be here today. So over the last couple of months, much of the country has been focused on the disasters that have hit various regions, especially through hurricanes and through wildfires. And I think there's really nothing that quite focuses the mind on the importance of affordable homes as does the possibility of losing it all. And of course, millions of low-income renters face that fear and that reality every day, especially around the beginning of the month when the rent is due. And in the last couple of months, millions more have faced that possibility of losing everything through disasters. So September was really a brutal month for hurricanes and October for wildfires. Whether by flooding in Houston and Jacksonville, extreme wind throughout Florida, or both flooding and wind in Beaumont, Texas, other parts of Texas, in Puerto Rico, and in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Altogether, over 1 million homes were damaged or destroyed, and many of them had been affordable to low-income people. And the repair and rebuilding after Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria, and the wildfires in California will take years, and it will take dedicated resources, federal funding for repair and rebuilding. So at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, we brought together a coalition of over 200 organizations to work together towards a just and equitable and a complete recovery from these disasters. And we're focused most on the lowest income people, those who are, and their communities, those who are most likely to be negatively impacted by disasters, to have the fewest resources to be able to recover, and for whom, without dedicated advocacy, are most likely to be left behind in the recovery. And it's still a little too soon to tell, but we know for sure that these disasters and the resources needed for the communities to recover will have an impact on the entire country's ability to recover from the much slower boil of the disaster of the affordable housing crisis that's impacted every community across the country. And we don't know yet whether the impact of this will be a further restriction on federal resources for affordable housing to make up for the extra resources needed for recovery, or whether it could be an opportunity to bring new attention and resources for affordable housing across the country. And Houston, Texas, which was hit so hard by Hurricane Harvey, it turns out is one of the most segregated communities across the country, right? So many of these communities that were impacted by the disasters faced other issues, like so many communities here in Alaska and elsewhere, issues of deep poverty, of poor infrastructure, and of segregation. And Houston had one of the most segregated communities across the country, but it's not alone, right? Communities from Ferguson to Flint to Milwaukee to Seattle to Anchorage highlight decades of federal, state, and local housing and transportation policies that created and often continues to sustain communities of deep poverty that are geographically cut off from opportunity. And research continues to build, showing just how harmful it can be for people, especially for kids, to grow up in neighborhoods of such deep poverty. So Raj Chetty's groundbreaking research from a couple of years ago really confirmed that where you live, from the state to the city to the neighborhood, even to the street, can have profound impacts on the opportunities that we get in life. And he found that of all the determinants that impact our ability to climb up the economic ladder, there's none that's more important than place, home, the communities in which we are raised. And he found that every year matters. So every year that a child lives in a community of deep poverty can cement lifelong negative impacts, everything from educational attainment to lifetime earnings to life expectancy. Today, over 14 million people across the country live in such neighborhoods of deep poverty, and the numbers are rising, nearly doubling since the year 2000. And the number of communities considered to be ones of deep poverty have increased by 75% over the same period of time. And these changes are having the most profound impacts on communities of color. So 1 in every 4 poor Black families and 1 in every 7 poor Latino families live in neighborhoods of deep poverty. And that's compared to 1 in every 13 poor white families. So the research has made really indisputable what we as housers have long known, that if we want to create and expand opportunity for people, we have to start with home. And they have to be affordable and decent homes. But wages have not kept up with rising rents. And so today, more than 11 million families in the country are paying more than half of their income towards their rent, and hundreds of thousands more have no homes at all or are doubled, tripled, even more overcrowded in homes. So every year, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition puts out a study called Out of Reach. And in it, we calculate what we call the housing wage. That's the amount that somebody has to earn an hour just to be able to afford to rent a modest 2-bedroom apartment. So nationally, the housing wage is $21.21 an hour. And here in Alaska, it's even higher. It's $24 an hour. So minimum wage workers, of course, these are emergency medical technicians. They are people caring for our aging parents. They're caring for our kids. They're people that we interact with and rely on every day in our communities. They're earning far less, $7.25 an hour nationally, but even in Alaska, where the minimum wage is about $2 more an hour, that minimum wage worker in Alaska has to work 77 hours a week to rent a one-bedroom apartment, and they have to work over 100 hours a week to be able to rent a two-bedroom apartment. And it's not just for the minimum wage workers for whom the rent is out of reach. The average renter in this country makes about $16 an hour. Here in Alaska, they make slightly more. They make about $19 an hour. That's still far less an hour than the $24 required to rent that two-bedroom apartment. And this is an issue that will be a problem for the foreseeable future. So 6 of the 7 jobs that have the highest projected growth for the next 10 years have incomes below the housing wage. And certainly in Alaska and in other rural areas with tribal lands, the housing issues are most severe on Indian reservations. And there, families are facing significant overcrowding, lack of plumbing, heating, and more. And the plumbing issue on tribal lands is most severe among Native Alaskan communities, even compared to other tribal communities across the country. So another piece of research that the coalition puts out each year quantifies the affordable housing shortage across the country. And we find that there is a shortage of 7.4 million homes nationally that are affordable and available for the lowest income people. So another way of looking at that is for every 100 extremely low income households, there's just 35 homes that are affordable and available to them. And in Alaska, it's even worse than the national average. You can see there, for every 100 extremely low-income households, there's just 32 homes that are affordable and available to them. And there's a shortage of over 16,000 units here in Alaska of homes affordable and available for those lowest-income people. So the result of this gap is severely cost-burdened renters, and in the most extreme cases, homelessness. And of course, it's kind of intuitive, right? But the lowest income people are those that are most likely to be severely cost burdened. And most are paying at least 50% of their income towards their rent. Many are paying much more, 70, 80, 90% of their income each month to have a home. So despite the obvious need, affordable housing throughout the country and here in Alaska is a rarity. The majority of families that are eligible for and in need of affordable housing receive no help at all. 3 out of 4 get no help at all. They stand in line waiting to be added to what is a housing lottery, where only the lucky 25% get the help that they need. So the need continues to grow as resources shrink, and this is why we have homelessness in this country. We have homelessness and we have housing poverty simply because the federal government does not fund solutions such as Section 8 vouchers at a scale necessary to keep up with the need. So you can see from this chart that as the housing needs increased, the funding for vouchers stayed steady. And actually, if we carry that top line out to current day, we'd see that that number went up even higher, and that the funding, the bottom line, the funding for the vouchers went down slightly. So in other words, the gap has increased between the resources and the need. And vouchers, it turns out, have received one of the smallest levels of cuts to its funding over the last 10 years. So since something called the Budget Control Act was enacted in 2011, funding across most HUD programs has shrunk pretty dramatically. Home funding cut by over half, CDBG reduced by about 30%. Native American housing grants have been cut by over 16% when they were not even keeping up with inflation. And it's in this context in which President Trump has proposed dramatic cuts across the entire HUD and USDA housing budget. Over 14% cuts proposed to HUD this year alone. And these cuts would have a devastating impact on millions of people across the country. President Trump's budget would mean more than 250,000 families who have Section 8 vouchers today losing that assistance. He would gut the public housing program. He would entirely eliminate the home and CDBG programs, which would starve local communities of the funding needed to build and preserve affordable homes and to revitalize distressed communities. He would eliminate the National Housing Trust Fund program, the first new resource in a generation created precisely to fill this gap. He would further cut Native American housing block grant programs. He would almost eliminate all rural housing programs. And the list, unfortunately, goes on. He would eliminate the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. He would eliminate the Legal Services Corporation. He would even eliminate the low-income home energy assistance program that literally keeps the heat on throughout cold winters in the homes of seniors and people with young kids. So there's a couple important things to keep in mind about the president's budget proposal. The first is that clearly, despite the spin, the budget has nothing to do with reducing the deficit. It's about increasing military spending at the expense of programs across the entire social safety net. The second and maybe most important thing to know is that we can and we will, and in fact we are, defeating these harmful budget cuts from being enacted. But the third thing to keep in mind is that these proposals will be back again next year and maybe the year after, and we'll have to keep up very focused and dedicated advocacy to protect these critical programs. So at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, we lead a campaign called the Campaign for Housing and Community Development Funding. It's made up of over 75 national housing and community development organizations that come together and work to increase the funding for HUD and USDA as much as possible. So this year we put out this report, A Place to Call Home, that looked at all of the affordable housing programs across HUD's budget to make the case for them, to look at how much funding communities receive and how many jobs are created. So in Alaska, you receive about $178 million in HUD funding. It creates over 20,000 jobs, direct and indirect, here in Alaska. And so these are the kind of stories that are important to keep telling to make the case to protect these programs. And together with the Campaign for Housing and Community Development Funding, this summer we did the Our Homes, Our Voices Week of Action. So the Week of Action is about demanding action on the affordable housing crisis and ensuring that not only do we not cut programs to solve homelessness and housing poverty, but we expand them. And there were over 60 events that happened across the country, including one here in Alaska at the state fairgrounds. The Sleep Out coincided with the Week of Action. And we were able to amplify all of these events as part of the same week to call attention. And we got a good amount of media attention from members of Congress, and it's having an impact. These events are having an impact. So although the budget is not final for this year, I'm happy to say that those devastating cuts that were proposed will almost certainly not be enacted, and that we're likely to essentially maintain the status quo for this year. But clearly maintaining the status quo is not enough given the need. And so another clear solution for the housing crisis for the lowest income renters is the National Housing Trust Fund program. It was created to fill the gap, to build and preserve homes affordable for the lowest income people. Alaska receives $3 million in funding each year and is putting that money to work for new development. You're setting aside a percentage of it for households with special needs, people with mental or physical disabilities, and people who are experiencing homelessness. And other states are using these funds really innovatively as well, setting aside units for people who are returning to their communities after incarceration, or people who are survivors of domestic violence. This program, too, unfortunately, is under threat to be eliminated. And so we have to work not only to protect the program, but to find ways to significantly expand it to meet the need. And there are opportunities to do that. So clearly we don't lack an understanding of the problem, right? And we don't lack solutions, proven solutions to end homelessness and housing poverty. And it turns out that we don't lack the resources either. So as a country, we spend about $200 billion a year to help Americans buy and rent their homes. And the bulk of those resources, a full 3/4 of it, goes to subsidize higher income homeowners through the mortgage interest deduction and other tax benefits of being a homeowner. So we spend more, as a country, we spend more every year to subsidize 7 million of the highest income homeowners than we do to assist 55 million of the lowest income renters combined. And in fact, there's a significant percentage of the benefit from the mortgage interest deduction that goes to the top 1% of earners in this country. So that means as taxpayers, we're spending $10.5 billion a year to subsidize the homes of some of the wealthiest people in the world. And this kind of waste clearly cannot be justified, especially in an environment of proposed cuts to the programs that serve the very lowest income people. So the National Low Income Housing Coalition leads another campaign called the United for Homes campaign, and in it we propose a solution to rebalance federal housing policy, to reform the mortgage interest deduction and reinvest the savings into proven solutions to end homelessness. And the solutions over 10 years, it could mean over 3 million new vouchers across the country, over 2 million new units developed. And the proposals, just very briefly, one is to lower the cap on the amount of mortgage on which you can deduct your interest from $1 million down to $500,000. The other is to shift from a deduction to a credit. I'll talk more a little bit about each of these. And then to reinvest the savings, over $240 billion over 10 years, into housing solutions for the lowest income people. So the first one I mentioned, lowering the cap on the amount of a mortgage on which you can deduct your interest. That change impacts fewer than 6% of mortgage holders across the country. In Alaska, it would impact little over 3% of mortgage holders. That change alone saves $87 billion over 10 years. And the second shift, you can see this is what a tax submission would look like if we shifted from a deduction to a credit. But the thing that you should know is that currently there are millions of low and middle income homeowners who get no benefit from having a mortgage because they don't earn enough to itemize their taxes and benefit from the mortgage interest deduction. If we shifted to a credit, here in Alaska, there are 73,000 homeowners who would get a tax break. And that savings over 10 years could mean $458 million for the state of Alaska to expand its National Housing Trust Fund program, to expand Section 8 vouchers, and other solutions for low-income renters. So it's possible. Tax reform is moving now in Congress and may or may not, I really have no idea, be achieved this year and the coming years. It's too volatile a political environment to project whether they'll actually be able to achieve it. But I can say with certainty that we have never been so close to our goal of rebalancing federal housing policy by reforming the mortgage interest deduction. And there's a number of proposals that Republicans have put forward that get us almost there, but we still have a long way to go. And Senators Murkowski and Sullivan can be really important champions in ensuring that when the mortgage interest deduction is reformed, that those savings are reinvested in solutions that help Alaskans afford their homes. So I hope you'll talk with your senators about the really critically important role that they can play in achieving more funding for Alaska. And then through the Action Campaign, which the coalition is a part of, there are efforts to expand the low-income housing tax credit program, which is obviously another critical resource for affordable homes here in Alaska. And there's legislation that your senators have co-sponsored that would not only expand the low-income housing tax credit program, but make it easier to incentivize development of units for the lowest income people, and especially for people in Native communities or on tribal lands. And there'll be other opportunities to expand resources for housing for the lowest income people. At some point, Congress must look at the comprehensive housing finance system, and when they do, we'll have an opportunity to expand funding for the National Housing Trust Fund program. At some point, they may work on a major infrastructure spending bill. And at that point, too, we'll have an opportunity to increase funding for the National Housing Trust Fund for other programs that serve the lowest income people. Congress is turning its attention to the drug epidemic across the country, the opioid epidemic and beyond. It's another opportunity for us to make the case for the importance of affordable homes in the lives of, in the ability for addicts to recover and for their communities to recover. So we're at a tipping point in this crisis, and we can choose to end homelessness and housing poverty. We have the solutions, we have the data, and we have the resources. What's missing is the political will to fund the solutions at the scale necessary to end the crisis. And clearly, building the political will starts with all of us, educating the public, educating members of Congress, and also by expanding our coalitions to go beyond the affordable housing field. So one of the things that's most exciting to me about this moment, and that makes me really feel optimistic that we can achieve change, is the broader coalitions that we are actively building. Dr. Megan Sandel is a pediatrician out of Children's Health Watch in Boston, and she talks about how affordable homes are a vaccine protecting people against, especially kids, against a variety of social ills. And she's been a tremendous leader in bringing others from the from the healthcare field to the advocacy for affordable homes. Recently, the American Academy of Pediatrics put out a report strongly making the case that housing is healthcare and calling for a major expansion of affordable housing programs. Teachers are getting involved as well. Major teacher unions that have members of tens of thousands of teachers who come to DC every year, they're seeing enough kids kind of churning in and out of their classrooms and seeing the impact that that's having not only on those kids and on their families, but on the entire classroom, that they are now joining in advocacy for affordable homes. So recently, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition launched a new campaign together with our partners at the National Alliance to End Homelessness, Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Children's Health Watch, and together with new partners like the National Education Association, healthcare groups like the National Association of Community Health Clinics, to together form a broadening and widening coalition around the housing needs of the lowest income people, because we understand more and more that if we care about inequality, poverty, segregation, if we care about healthcare, education, transportation, nutrition, if we care about local economies and creating jobs, then the solutions start with home. So this work has never been easy. You all know this very well. Increasing resources for the poorest, seniors, people with disabilities, veterans, it's always required a long and determined struggle. But we're certainly not turning back now, not when there's so much to do and we have so many possibilities to get it done. So we do have our work cut out for us in the coming years. The threats to critical affordable housing programs that serve the poorest households have never been greater. And at the same time, we have tremendous opportunity for us to advance towards our mission of ending homelessness and housing poverty. And with the housing crisis having reached new heights and impacting the lowest income people the most, we have to redouble our efforts, not only to protect the programs that exist, but to expand them. So thank you all so much. Thank you for your tremendous work and your dedication. Thank you for your commitment and for your advocacy now and in the years to come. It's never been more important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. The National Low Income Housing Coalition has been an amazing resource for us at the COC level. I do encourage you to come to the listening Q&A session tomorrow at 10 o'clock so you can learn more about how they can be a resource for your community and what you can expect coming down the line at the federal level as well, and how you can get involved. So one more round of applause for Diane here again.